Hello friends, today I tell you information about 7 wonders of the world. First of all, please subscribe my channel and press the bell icon for interesting and informative videos. So let's start it. 7 wonders of the world. Number 1. The Great Pyramid of Giza is a defining symbol of Egypt and the last of the ancient 7 wonders of the world. It is located on the Giza Plateau near the modern city of Cairo and was built over a 20-year period during the reign of the king Khufu 2589–2566 BCE, also known as Cheops, of the 4th dynasty. Until the Eiffel Tower was completed in Paris, France in 1889 CE, the Great Pyramid was the tallest structure made by human hands in the world, a record it held for over 3,000 years and one unlikely to be broken. Other scholars have pointed to the Lincoln Cathedral spire in England, built in 1300 CE, as the structure which finally surpassed the Great Pyramid in height, but, still, the Egyptian monument held the title for an impressive span of time. The pyramid rises to a height of 479 feet 146 meters with a base of 754 feet 230 meters and is comprised of over 2 million blocks of stone. Some of these stones are of such immense size and weight, such as the granite slabs in the King's Chamber, that the logistics of raising and positioning them so precisely seems an impossibility by modern standards. The pyramid was first excavated using modern techniques and scientific analysis in 1880 CE by Sir William Matthew Flinders Petrie (1853–1942 CE), the British archaeologist who set the standard for archaeological operations in Egypt generally and at Giza specifically. Writing on the pyramid in 1883 CE, Flinders Petrie noted, although many theories persist as to the purpose of the pyramid, the most widely accepted understanding is that it was constructed as a tomb for the king. Exactly how it was built, however, still puzzles people in the modern day. The theory of ramps running around the outside of the structure to move the blocks into place has been largely discredited. So-called fringe or New Age theories abound, in an effort to explain the advanced technology required for the structure, citing extraterrestrials and their imagined frequent visits to Egypt in antiquity. These theories continue to be advanced in spite of the increasing body of evidence substantiating that the pyramid was built by the ancient Egyptians using technological means which, most likely, were so common to them that they felt no need to record them. Still, the intricacy of the interior passages, shafts, and chambers, the King's Chamber, Queen's Chamber, and Grand Gallery, as well as the nearby Osiris shaft, coupled with the mystery of how the pyramid was built at all and its orientation to cardinal points, encourages the persistence of these fringe theories. Number 2. Hanging Gardens of Babylon. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon were the fabled gardens which adorned the capital of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, built by its greatest king Nebuchadnezzar II, r. 605–562 BCE. One of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, they are the only wonder whose existence is disputed amongst historians. Some scholars claim the gardens were actually at Nineveh, capital of the Assyrian Empire, some stick with the ancient writers and await archaeology to provide positive proof, and still others believe they are merely a figment of the ancient imagination. Archaeology at Babylon itself and ancient Babylonian texts are silent on the matter, but ancient writers describe the gardens as if they were at Nebuchadnezzar's capital and still in existence in Hellenistic times. The exotic nature of the gardens compared to the more familiar Greek items on the list and the mystery surrounding their location and disappearance have made the Hanging Gardens of Babylon the most captivating of all the 7 wonders. Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar II. Babylon, located about 80 kilometers (50 miles) south of modern Baghdad in Iraq, was an ancient city with a history of settlement dating back to the 3rd millennium BCE. The greatest period in the city's history was in the 6th century BCE during the reign of Nebuchadnezzar II, when the city was the capital of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. The empire had been founded by Nebuchadnezzar's father Nabopolassar, r. 625–605 BCE, after his victories over the Assyrian Empire. Nebuchadnezzar II would go on to even greater things, including the capture of Jerusalem in 597 BCE. The Babylonian king then set about making his capital one of the most splendid cities in the world. The Ishtar Gate was built c. 575 BCE with its fine towers and depictions in tiles of animals both real and imaginary. A 7 to 20 kilometers brick double wall surrounded the city, the largest ever built, and then, possibly, he added the extensive pleasure gardens whose fame spread throughout the ancient world. The gardens. The majority of scholars agree that the idea of cultivating gardens purely for pleasure, as opposed to the production of food, originated in the Fertile Crescent, where they were known as a paradise. From there the notion would spread throughout the ancient Mediterranean so that by Hellenistic times even private individuals, or at least the wealthier ones, were cultivating their own private gardens in their homes. Gardens were not just about flowers and plants, either, as architectural, sculptural, and water features were added, and even the views were a consideration for the ancient landscape gardener. Gardens became such a desired feature that fresco painters, such as those at Pompeii, covered entire walls of villas with scenes which gave the illusion that on entering a room one was also entering a garden. All of these outdoor pleasant places, then, owed their existence to ancient Mesopotamia and, above all, to the magnificent hanging gardens of Babylon. Statue of Zeus at Olympia in Greece. The monumental statue of Zeus at Olympia in Greece was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Created in the 430s BCE under the supervision of the master Greek sculptor Phidias, the huge ivory and gold statue was bigger even than that of Athena in the Parthenon. Worshipped by pilgrims from across the Mediterranean, the statue inspired countless imitations and defined the standard representation of Zeus in Greek and Roman art in sculpture, on coins, pottery, and gemstones. Lost in later Roman times following its removal to Constantinople, Phidias' masterpiece captivated the ancient world for 1,000 years and was the must-see sight for anyone who attended the ancient Olympic Games. Phidias, master sculptor. The master sculptor and architect Phidias, also spelt Phidias, active c. 465 to 425 BCE, who had already supervised construction of the Parthenon, 447 to 432 BCE, in Athens, and its giant statue of the city's patron goddess Athena, was called on again to produce a similarly monumental sculpture of Zeus. The location was to be Olympia in the western Peloponnese of Greece, where a huge brand new temple awaited. It was there that, every 4 years, the Pan-Hellenic Olympic Games 776 BCE to 393 CE were dedicated. Olympia was then controlled by the polis city-state of Elis, and the sacred site attracted thousands of travelers, pilgrims, and sports fans from across the Mediterranean. The new cult statue and temple to house it would be fine additions, adding prestige to Olympia at a time when there were still rival games held at other sites such as Delphi, Nemea, and Isthmia near Corinth. In addition, a magnificent dedication to Zeus, father of the Olympian gods and supreme deity of the ancient Greek religion, could only be a positive for the Hellenes and indeed all of ancient Greece's spiritual and material well-being. Phidias was the perfect choice for what would be a challenging project requiring hundreds of craftsmen and several years of work. The master sculptor moved to Olympia, and excavations in the 20th century CE revealed his workshop, which contained a simple red figure Attic cup or wine jug inscribed in Greek Phideo Imi, I belong to Phidias. The workshop also contained ivory tools, a small hammer for working gold, and molds for pieces of a large female statue. The temple. In the 5th century BCE, the sanctuary of Olympia reached its peak of prosperity and a massive Doric 6 by 13 column temple was begun c. 460 BCE. Completed c. 457 BCE, it was designed by Liban of Elis, and it was the biggest in Greece at that time, measuring over 20 meters (65.5 feet) in height, 64.12 by 27.68 meters (210 by 91 feet) along its sides, with columns 10.53 meters (34.5 feet) in height and 2.25 meters (7 feet) in diameter at their base. The pediments of the temple displayed magnificent sculpture, on the east side the mythical chariot race between Pelops and Oinomaus, and on the western pediment a battle scene with centaurs with the majestic central figure of Apollo. Metapiece from the temple represented the labors of Hercules. Many of these decorative figures sculptures survive today and can be seen at the museum at the archaeological site of Olympia. Number 3 Temple of Artemis at Ephesus. The Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, located on the western coast of Asia Minor, modern Turkey, was built in the 6th century BCE, and such was its tremendous size, double the dimensions of other Greek temples including the Parthenon, that it was soon regarded as one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Destroyed by a deliberate fire in the 4th century BCE and then rebuilt, the Great Ionic Temple survived until late antiquity and the Gothic invasion of c. 267 CE. Once again rebuilt, in 401 CE it was torn down for the last time by a Christian mob. Today only the foundations and a solitary column stand as a reminder of the site where once stood the greatest temple in the ancient Mediterranean. Artemis and Ephesus. Ephesus, or Ephesos, was a Greek colony on the eastern coast of Asia Minor founded in the 8th century BCE, although there had been Greek settlers in the area from c. 1200 BCE. The Greek goddess Artemis, Diana to the Romans, was particularly important to the Ephesians, indeed her birthplace was considered by them as nearby Ortygia, for other Greeks it was Delos. Artemis was the goddess of chastity, hunting, wild animals, forests, childbirth, and fertility. The goddess cult at Ephesus included Eastern elements borrowed from goddesses such as Isis, Cybele, and the mistress of the animals, as did her representation in art, with surviving statues, unlike elsewhere in Greece, being covered in eggs as symbols of her role as a fertility goddess. Hence, the goddess worshipped at Ephesus is often referred to as Artemis Ephesia. The city had an up-and-down relationship with the neighboring kingdom of Lydia, resisting many attacks but at the same absorbing some cultural elements. The Lydian king Croesus r. 560–546 BCE conquered Ephesus between 560 and 550 BCE, and then funded the construction of new buildings, including a great new temple to Artemis or, as the Greek historian Herodotus put it, he dedicated many columns. Histories 1.92. An interesting archaeological find at the site was a column drum carrying the inscription, dedicated by Croesus. There had already been several versions of the temple over the centuries at Ephesus, and Herodotus describes the Ephesians tying a rope 1,243 meters (4,081 feet) long between the old temple and the city in a desperate and, as it turned out, futile hope that their dedication of the entire city to Artemis would save them from the Lydians. The temple. The magnificent new Ionic temple was supervised by, according to the 1st century CE Roman writer Pliny the Elder, the master architect Chersiphron of Knossos, while Strabo, the Greek geographer, c. 64 BCE, c. 24 CE, reports that credit should go to both Chersiphron and his son Metagenes. However, both figures may have actually lived in the 8th century BCE and so been involved in the very first version of the temple. Nevertheless, a treatise on the temple written in the mid-6th century BCE is attributed to Chersiphron and Metagenes. Vitruvius, the 1st century BCE Roman architect and writer, has the project begun by the former pair and completed by Paeonius of Ephesus. Begun c. 550 BCE, the marble temple would take 120 years to complete, and like its predecessors, it was dedicated to Artemis and so was sometimes referred to as the Artemisium or Artemision. Like most temples to the goddess in the Greek world, it was located a short distance from the city as Artemis was thought to preside over boundaries, physical or otherwise, wild vegetation, animals, and nature in general. According to Pliny the Elder in his Natural History 36.97, the temple measured 129.5 meters (425 feet) in length and was 68.6 meters (225 feet) wide, almost double the size of the 5th century BCE Parthenon at Athens, 69.5 by 30.9 meters. It had 127 columns which were 18.3 meters (60 feet) high and 1.2 meters (4 feet) in diameter. The columns were arranged in a double row on all 4 sides, 8 or 9 on the short sides and 20 or 21 on the long sides. Those columns on the facades were decorated with relief figures from Greek mythology. The decorative frieze of the temple carried scenes involving Amazons, who were, in Greek mythology, supposed to have sought shelter at Ephesus from Hercules. The architrave blocks above the columns are estimated to have weighed 24 tons each, and the feat of engineering that put them in place led to the Ephesians believing it was the work of Artemis herself. According to Vitruvius in his On Architecture 2.9.13, the cult statue of Artemis which stood within the temple and for which the whole project was actually started was made of cedar wood. The foundations of the temple have received some attention, first by Pliny the Elder, who praises the engineer and sculptor Theodorus of Samos for preparing them on marshy ground and thus mitigating the effect of earthquakes. Pliny also notes that alternate layers of sheepskins and packed charcoal were used to provide the necessary stability to support the massive weight of the structures about to be built on top. Excavations at the site in 1870 CE did indeed reveal that the foundations of the temple were composed of layers of a soft mortar substance and charcoal. Layers of marble chips and charcoal have also been discovered in 20th century CE excavations, but neither explorations have found evidence of sheepskins. Number 4. The Mausoleum at Halicarnassus, Bodrum, Turkey. The mausoleum at Halicarnassus, Bodrum, Turkey, was a massive tomb built for Mausolus, the ruler of Caria, c. 350 BCE. The marble structure was so immense and decorated with such an array of striking sculptures that it made it onto the list of the 7 wonders of the ancient world and thereafter gave its name to any large funeral monument, a mausoleum. Following a damaging earthquake, and with many elements cannibalized for the 15th century CE Bodrum Castle, the mausoleum no longer survives. Podium and column fragments do survive, while some substantial pieces of the mausoleum's decorative sculpture can today be seen at the British Museum in London. Mausolus and Halicarnassus. Mausolus, Mausolos or Mausolos, was a satrap of Persia who ruled semi-independently in Caria in modern southwest Turkey from c. 377 BCE, and Halicarnassus or Halicarnassos was selected as his capital c. 370 BCE. Halicarnassus was already a thriving ancient city, famous as the birthplace of the celebrated 5th century BCE historian Herodotus and with a history dating back to the Bronze Age. Mausolus made the city even grander, adding many fine buildings including a new harbor, palace and several temples. Caria prospered thanks to Mausolus's control and development of coastal cities, which were then able to better capitalize on eastern Mediterranean trade, especially with roads. The ruler's construction of a better road network to connect inland sites further improved the region's prosperity and tax revenues came flooding into the capital. The accumulated riches in the royal coffers of Caria would be spent on one of the most lavish personal building projects ever seen in the ancient world. When Mausolos died c. 353 BCE, his body was entombed in what became known as the Mausoleon or Mausoleum at Halicarnassus. The tomb, planned by the ruler for himself and his descendants from c. 367 CE, was finished off by his sister wife Artemisia. It was probably completed around 350 BCE, although Artemisia herself died the year before. She would be interred along with her husband and subsequent generations of their family. Conceived as a sacred monument for the city and the ruling dynasty, it was located within a large precinct right in the city's center. The Mausoleum. The construction of the mausoleum was, according to the 1st century BCE Roman architect Vitruvius in his On Architecture, supervised by the architect Pythias of Priene, and the sculptor Satyrus, who later jointly wrote a treatise on it. The structure was, like Caria itself at the time, an eclectic mix of Greek, Near Eastern, and Egyptian architectural features. It was built using Anatolian and Pentelic marble on a rectangular podium and consisted of an Ionic colonnade with a stepped pyramidal roof. On top of the roof was a massive statue of Mausolus riding a chariot in the guise of Hercules, made by Pythias himself. The 1st century CE Roman writer Pliny the Elder gives the following description of the mausoleum. Modern excavations at Halicarnassus have revealed that the actual dimensions of the mausoleum, today only fragments remain, vary slightly from Pliny's description. The high podium or base, in fact, measured 38 by 32 meters (125 by 104 feet) according to the position of the cornerstones still in situ. There is corroboration of the 36 Ionic columns and a pyramid with 24 steps. A surviving lintel stone indicates the spacing between the columns and suggests the overall dimensions of the building were 32 by 26 meters (104 by 85 feet). A 2-meter (6.5 feet) high wall once surrounded the whole mausoleum. A surviving fragment of a chariot wheel, likely from the top sculpture, suggests the complete wheel would have been over 2 meters in diameter, making the statue some 6 meters high. The tomb itself was set within the podium, and finds of sacrificial remains, oxen, sheep, lambs, and birds suggest the building acted as the center of a hero cult, likely directed towards Mausolus's role as the city's refounder c. 370 BCE. Alternatively, the remains may merely indicate a sending-off feast for the dead ruler before his journey into the next life. According to ancient writers, the famed sculptor Leochares c. 365 to 325 BCE worked on some of the decorative sculpture of the mausoleum. Pliny the Elder agrees and also records the involvement of 3 other famous artists, Timotheus, Bryaxis, and Scopas. Vitruvius adds Praxiteles to the list and informs us that all of these great artists appraised each other's work to decide what would be included in the finished structure. The mausoleum, then, boasted many full, in the round figure sculptures carved on 3 different scales and painted bright colors, some of which would have stood between the columns while others stood on the steps of the podium. Fragments of various sizes have been excavated, which once belonged to 66 different statues. Historians estimate there were originally at least 100. One such figure, now in the British Museum, stands 3 meters (9 feet 10 in) tall and depicts a man wearing a Greek himation mantle over a long carrion tunic. A marble frieze with relief carvings ran around the top of the podium, which had metal additions attached such as weapons and horses' reins. This frieze, just below the colonnade, was almost 1 meter (39 inches) in height and included Greeks fighting Amazons, and Amazonomachy, as well as chariot racers, although these may have been part of the frieze running around the interior tomb chamber. The frieze around the base of the roof's chariot was decorated with fighting centaurs, and large lions stood at the base of the pyramid. The Seven Wonders. Some of the monuments of the ancient world so impressed visitors from far and wide with their beauty, artistic and architectural ambition, and sheer scale that their reputation grew as must-see themata sites for the ancient traveler and pilgrim. 7 such monuments became the original bucket list when ancient writers such as Herodotus, Callimachus of Cyrene, Antipater of Sidon, and Philo of Byzantium compiled shortlists of the most wonderful sites of the ancient world. The mausoleum of Halicarnassus made it onto the established list of 7 wonders because of its audacious dimensions, rich sculptural decoration, and the many other fine buildings and artworks which surrounded it, all made by the finest artists and architects of the day. As Pausanias, the 2nd century CE travel writer noted, here, then, is perhaps the secret of the mausoleum's success, the audacious combination of monumental architecture and gigantic sculpture solely for visual effect, commemorating not a god but a mortal. The mausoleum, unlike many other ancient wonders, survived more or less intact throughout antiquity, despite a few earthquakes over the centuries. The tomb likely only collapsed in the Middle Ages, perhaps in the 13th century CE. Pieces of the surviving structure, including those with decorative sculpture, were used by the Knights of St. John of Malta in the walls of the Castle of St. Peter at Bodrum, constructed c. 1494 CE. Many sculptural pieces and other fragments from the mausoleum were discovered during the British excavations of the 1850s CE. Still other remnants were extracted from the walls of Bodrum Castle, and many of these are now in the British Museum in London. They include the large statue of a male figure already described, another of an unidentified woman. These have traditionally been attributed to Mausolus and Artemisia but without any evidence, slabs from the friezes, and several lions and horses in various forms of completeness. The site of the mausoleum itself is today little more than an earth pit with a few stones and column drums strewn about, nothing at all to hint at what was once the greatest tomb in the world after the pyramids of Giza. Number 5. Colossus of Rhodos. The Colossus of Rhodes was a gigantic 33-meter-high statue of the sun god Helios which stood by the harbor of that city from c. 280 BCE, one of the most important trading ports in the ancient Mediterranean. Made by the local sculptor Chares using bronze, the statue soon appeared on contemporary travel writers' lists of must-see sites and was thus known as one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Sadly, the giant Helios did not last long. Toppled by an earthquake in 228 or 226 BCE, its massive broken pieces cluttered the docks of Rhodes for a millennium before being melted down as scrap in the mid-7th century CE. Number 6. Helios and Rhodes. Helios was the god of the sun, offspring of the titans Hyperion and Theia. Not specifically the subject of a widespread cult across Greece, Plato informs us in his Symposium and other works that many people, including Socrates, would greet the sun and offer prayers each day. One place Helios was particularly worshipped was at Rhodes, the largest of the Dodecanese islands of Greece in the eastern Mediterranean. There he was the most important deity, their patron god, and honored by the Haleia festival, the highlight of the island's religious calendar and a pan-Hellenic games much like the ancient Olympic Games. Indeed, in the island's founding mythology, its very name derives from the nymph Rhodas, who bore 7 sons to Helios. In the Hellenistic period, the 4th to 1st century BCE, Helios and the god Apollo would become practically synonymous. The city of Rhodes, with its 5 harbors, was ideally placed on the island of the same name to prosper from trade during the Hellenistic domination of the Mediterranean under Alexander the Great's successors, especially when more and more cities were established in the east. The island's wealth and strategic position on trade routes did not go unnoticed by ambitious foreign rulers. Antigonus I c. 382–301 BCE, one of Alexander's successors who controlled Macedon and northern Greece, was one such ruler, and he sent his son Demetrius I of Macedon c. 336 c. 282 BCE to attack Rhodes in 305–4 BCE. The island's recent alliance with Antigonus's rival Ptolemy I c. 366–282 BCE in Egypt was another reason to attack Rhodes and neutralize its powerful naval fleet. After a 12-month siege, the Rhodians and their formidable fortifications stood firm, and Demetrius negotiated a truce and abandoned the blockade. The Macedonian prince gained his nickname, the Besieger of Cities, but not much else. Demetrius left behind so much siege engine material, including 136.5 meters (120 feet) high tower, that the Rhodians were able to sell it off for a handsome profit. The polis or city-state already had plenty of money from its lucrative control of trade, and there seemed no better way to spend this new windfall than on a massive statue in honor of their patron god, a move which celebrated the island's hard-won freedom and which might perhaps perpetuate the good times the island was enjoying in the 4th century BCE. The Colossus. The man commissioned with the Herculean task of sculpting the giant Helios was Chares of Lindus, a city on Rhodes. The project would not be finished until c. 280 BCE, and as the 1st century CE Roman writer Pliny the Elder noted, it cost 300 talents and took at least 12 years to complete the bronze figure, which stood some 70 cubits or 33 meters (108 feet) high. It is likely that the bronze outer shell, presumably applied in sheets and assembled on site, was supported by internal struts made of iron, and certain pieces were weighted with stones to increase the figure's stability. Although Helios was usually envisaged and represented in art as a charioteer with a sun-beamed halo riding across the sky and dragging the sun behind him, the Rhodians perhaps went for a more statuesque representation for their colossal figure. Unlike many other super-famous sculptures from antiquity, though, there are no surviving representations or scale models of the Colossus in other ancient art forms to help reconstruct in detail what the Colossus may have looked like. If the depictions of Helios on the Hellenistic silver coins of Rhodes are anything to go by, we can speculate that the statue may have had the god with his usual crown of pointed sunbeams. A relief of Helios on a stone from a temple at Rhodes has the god shading his eyes with one hand, but whether this was replicating the stance of the Colossus or not is unknown. Similarly, the popular belief that the statue was holding a torch like the U.S. Statue of Liberty is based on the misreading of a later Rhodian poem, thus confusing a real light with the metaphor of one in the statue's original base inscription. To you, Helios, yes, to you the people of Dorian Rhodes raised this colossus high up to the heaven, after they had calmed the bronze wave of war, and crowned their country with spoils won from the enemy. Not only over the sea but also on land they set up the bright light of unfettered freedom. The exact location of the statue is not known, as no ancient writer bothered to say, but the eastern side of the harbor is the most likely spot. Certainly, later Roman statues at ports like Ostia had statues near their harbors which may have mimicked the great example at Rhodes. The medieval fortress of St. Nicholas, itself built on the site of an earlier church dedicated to the same saint, still stands on the Mandraki harbor mole. Pagan monument sites were often reused by Christians as a potent symbol of the new order, and there was a tradition in medieval times that the broken feet of the Colossus once stood here. More concrete evidence, well, actually sandstone evidence, is a large circle of cut blocks which could have served as the foundation for the statue's base. In addition, there are fine, slightly curved marble blocks randomly used in the fortress's walls which date to the 3rd century BCE, as well as odd-shaped stones which may have been part of the weights used in the statue's interior. A second possible location is in the high city center, where there was a sanctuary to Helios if inscriptions and suitable pieces of masonry can be relied upon as testimony. The Greeks typically cited their statues of deities either in or next to the sanctuary that was dedicated to them, but, despite extensive archaeological investigations, no traces of the statue have been found here. Finally, a tradition built up, perpetuated by oft-reprinted medieval drawings, that the giant figure stood astride the entrance to the military harbor, but the dimensions required for a figure in such a pose which allowed ships to pass underneath make it a highly unlikely possibility and contrary to all ancient sources on the statue's dimensions. All that can be said for sure about the Colossus of Rhodes, then, is that it was massive and that quality was a particular feature of Hellenistic sculpture and art in general, as the historian P. Jordan here summarizes. Number 7 Lighthouse of Alexandria. The Lighthouse of Alexandria was built on the island of Pharos outside the harbors of Alexandria, Egypt c. 300–280 BCE during the reigns of Ptolemy I and II. With a height of over 100 meters (330 feet), it was so impressive that it made it onto the established list of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Although now lost, the structure's lasting legacy, after standing for over 1,600 years, is that it gave its Greek name, Pharos, to the architectural genre of any tower with a light designed to guide mariners. Perhaps influencing later Arab minaret architecture and certainly creating a whole host of copycat structures in harbors around the Mediterranean, the lighthouse was, after the pyramids of Giza, the tallest structure in the world built by human hands. Alexandria. Alexandria in Egypt was founded by Alexander the Great in 331 BCE, and thanks to its 2 natural harbors on the Nile Delta, the city prospered as a trading port under the Ptolemaic dynasty 305–30 BCE and throughout antiquity. A cosmopolitan city with citizens from all over the Greek world, the city had its own assembly and coinage and became a renowned center of learning. The lighthouse was intended to guide and protect sailors, and to that end was dedicated to Zeus Soter, deliverer. Around 300 BCE, Ptolemy I Soter r. 323–282 BCE commissioned the building of a massive lighthouse to guide ships into Alexandria and provide a permanent reminder of his power and greatness. The project was completed some 20 years later by his son and successor Ptolemy II r. 285–246 BCE. The structure only added to the impressive list of things to see at the great city, which included the Tomb of Alexander, the museum, an institution for scholars, the Serapeum Temple, and the magnificent library. The lighthouse. According to several ancient sources, the lighthouse was the work of the architect Sostratus of Cnidus, but he may have been the project's financial backer. The structure was located on the very tip of the limestone islet of Pharos facing the harbors of Alexandria. These 2 natural harbors were the Great Harbor and the whimsically named Eunostos or Harbor of Fortunate Return. The mainland was linked to the island of Pharos by a causeway, the Heptastadion, which measured around 1.2 kilometers (0.75 miles). The lighthouse, we are informed by a contemporary writer named Posidippos, was intended to guide and protect sailors and to that end was dedicated to 2 gods, Zeus Soter, deliverer, whose dedicatory inscription on the tower was made with half-meter high letters, and possibly Proteus, the Greek sea god, also known as the Old Man of the Sea. The lighthouse at Alexandria was certainly not the first such aid to ancient mariners, but it was probably the first monumental one. Thassos, the North Aegean island, for example, was known to have had a tower lighthouse in the Archaic period, and beacons and landmarks were widely used by cities to help sailors across the Mediterranean. Ancient lighthouses were built primarily as navigational aids for where a harbor was located rather than as a warning of hazardous shallows or submerged rocks, although, because of the dangerous waters of Alexandria's harbor, the Pharos performed both functions. The exact design of the lighthouse, unfortunately, is not made clear by ancient writers, with descriptions often being vague, confusing, and conflicting. Most sources do agree that the tower was white, making it more visible, and that it had 3 floors, the lowest being rectangular, the middle one octagonal, and the top one round. Also, mostly agreed upon is the presence of a statue of Zeus Soter on the top. Later Arab writers describe a ramp rising around the outside of the lower part of the tower and an internal staircase to reach the upper levels. Modern historians have debated the height of the tower, and estimates range from 100 to 140 meters, 330 to 460 feet, which would, in any case, have made the Pharos the second tallest architectural structure in the world after the pyramids at Giza. A fire, likely burning oil as wood was scarce, was kept at the top of the tower to make it visible at night, but whether this was so from the outset is debated by historians, largely because the earliest references to the Pharos in the works of ancient writers make no mention at all of a light. Later sources do describe the Pharos as a lighthouse and not merely a landmark tower useful only during daylight. The flame and several other points regarding the lighthouse are mentioned in the following description by the 1st century CE Roman writer Pliny the Elder. According to later Arab sources, there was even a mirror, presumably of polished bronze, to reflect the flame over a greater distance out to sea. The mirror may also have functioned as a reflector of the sun. The tower, with no light visible, appears on Roman imperial coinage of the city from Domitian to Commodus, 81 to 192 CE, which clearly show a large, narrow-windowed tower topped with a monumental statue and 2 smaller figures of Triton blowing a conch shell. These coins show the entrance to the tower being at the very base, while later Arab descriptions have it higher up. The Pharos also appeared in mosaics and sarcophagi throughout antiquity, confirming its wide fame. Please subscribe my channel and press the bell icon for interesting and informative videos. Thanks for watching till end.